We're watching Capital City Sunday.
Good morning. This week on Capital City Sunday, the PFAS problem in Wisconsin, the continued fight over funding to address the contamination, and the governor's new veto of a Republican bill targeting the pollution.
This was essentially a poison pill. It was something that Republicans couldn't pass into law.
How Democrats say the GOP bill would have put restrictions on the DNR's ability to crack down on polluters.
The only thing I won't ever compromise on is holding innocent landowners responsible.
And the bill's co-author reacts to the governor's veto, where he is willing to compromise.
I think both campaigns and both candidates understand the importance of coming to Wisconsin as a battleground state.
And the battle for Wisconsin, how Joe Biden and Donald Trump are focusing on our state and the demographic that will be the key to winning here in November. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sarah Massler-Donar. This week, the issue of PFAS contamination and how to address it was once again making headlines. The Biden administration announced new regulations on the amount of PFAS that can be in drinking water. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources previously enforced a standard ratio of 70 parts per trillion for PFAS in public drinking water. The DNR will now have to tighten the standard to a ratio of 4 parts per trillion. In the meantime, Governor Evers and the Republican-controlled Finance Committee are still deadlocked on PFAS funding. Evers vetoed a Republican-backed PFAS bill and called the Finance Committee into special session this week, urging them to release the $125 million earmarked to fight PFAS. Evers and other environmental groups say the legislation limited the DNR's authority to hold polluters accountable. Republicans say the state needs to protect innocent landowners. Here on the show with me now is Democratic State Senator Kelda Roys. She is also a member of the Joint Finance Committee. Senator, thanks for joining us this morning.
Great to be with you again, Sarah.
Yeah, welcome back to the show. Now, let's start with this. I have had Senator Eric Wimberger on the show before. He is a co-sponsor of that PFAS legislation that the governor just vetoed last week. He'll be joining us later on the show today. Now, he is firm in his concern that without that innocent landowner provision in that legislation the governor vetoed, the DNR would go after landowners whose properties are contaminated with PFAS through no fault of their own. That's a provision at issue here. We know this. The governor, other environmental groups say the DNR's authority should not be limited, that this provision lets polluters off the hook potentially. So my question for you, how can people be sure that the state won't target landowners like farmers without a provision that prevents it?
Well, there is still going to be authority of the Joint Finance Committee to manage how these grants are given and what actions are undertaken. What we don't want to do is bind the DNR, prevent it from doing what it was actually set up to do, which is protect the health of all Wisconsinites and protect our natural resources from pollution, from contamination. And this was essentially a poison pill. It was something that Republicans couldn't pass into law, and so they were determined to tie it into this PFAS legislation, knowing that there's overwhelming support and need to get this money into communities' hands and help address contamination. And so they decided, here's a way we can kneecap the DNR, not just today, but going forward in the future. And we're just not going to allow that to happen.
Also, lawmakers have cited the nonpartisan Wisconsin Legislative Council, which in a memo indicated that a company or other entity that manufactures PFAS would not be likely to fall into the provision either. So in that sense, how do you respond to that memo?
Well, I think this is a very clear situation of Republicans creating a problem, they're manufacturing it, and being unwilling to actually come to the table with a compromise. I don't think there's broad disagreement about the fact that we need to get this money out and address PFAS, but I do think that the Republicans want to use this to make permanent changes that are going to harm the health of Wisconsinites in the future. The most terrible thing that can happen to landowners who have PFAS contamination through no fault of their own is for Republicans to continue being able to obstruct the funds getting into their hands to help address it and clean it. And that's unfortunately what's happened.
And would you don't think that the governor's veto is obstructing this?
I don't, because the governor's been very, very clear. And in fact, we didn't even need legislation to allocate these funds. The DNR has made requests to the Joint Finance Committee, which is the normal process when money is put away in a lockbox like this, to get the funds, and the Joint Finance Committee has just ignored it. And so it's not like we have to have legislation. The Republicans could decide at any point that they're ready to get this money into the hands of the local communities who have been most affected by PFAS contamination, and they just refuse to do so for now 280 some days.
So at this point, the governor and Republicans are deadlocked on PFAS funding and that funding for the Chippewa Valley to address its current healthcare crisis with the closure of those hospitals and many clinics in the area. You know, you talk about how the Joint Finance Committee has not responded to that DNR request to release that money. Republicans saying, you know, that might create, quote unquote, a slush fund. There's no plan there. So they have a position, you have a position, as we often see in politics. What other solutions can be done here? Because both sides seem very firm in where they're at. How can you have bipartisan conversations to move this deadlock forward?
Well, I think what we have to do is get these funds into the hands of local communities. And that means allowing you know, if the Republicans object to what the DNR has proposed, then they should have a hearing on it. They should debate it. They should say what their concerns are, and they should offer an alternative. And that's what's not happening. Instead, it's just take our poison pill or nothing. We won't have a conversation. And I think, you know, what's frustrating about this is there's a backdrop here. There's a long history, right, of Republicans. They want to appear as if they are concerned about PFAS contamination because they know it's on the minds of people throughout the state. But it's to their interest to make government not function. And so the more that they obstruct government, the more they're rewarded for it politically. And that's a terrible thing for people in Wisconsin to have one party that's basically invested in making government not function. And then they can turn around and blame it for not functioning well.
So when we talk about, so Republicans have seemingly now rejected the governor's call for a special session of the Joint Finance Committee later this week. Will you be showing up for that meeting?
I will, and I hope I won't be alone. I hope that my Democratic colleagues and I will have our Republican colleagues there so we could actually talk about this. Because I do think this affects people all across the state. This isn't a red or blue issue. You know, your health is harmed no matter how you vote from PFAS. And we have to do something. It's not enough to just say, well, we allocated this money and now we're going to hold it hostage.
I want to move on to a different topic here. Now, we learned late last week that Justice Ann Walsh Bradley would not be seeking re-election. She is a liberal-leaning justice, part of a liberal majority on the court right now. Now, this means next year's Supreme Court race is even more crucial for both parties here that are, you know, it's liberal majority right now, but of course next year's race up for control again, right? So are you concerned that not having an incumbent in next year's race could hurt the chances of keeping that liberal majority?
No, I think that the voters of the state have been very, very clear. You know, when Democrats and liberals win statewide elections, you know, the vast majority of the time in recent years, and especially since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, this state is going to continue to see the most ultra-right-wing efforts to ban abortion, to attack birth control, to attack IVF. This has been long-standing, and I don't think Wisconsinites want to see that future. And so this is going to remain an open issue, and especially in these judicial races.
Over the next year here, as we now are seeing that an incumbent will not be running in this Supreme Court race, you know, how do you see the candidate pool playing out?
Well, I'm very enthusiastic. We have great jurists all over the state of Wisconsin. I don't think most people knew how to say Protasewicz before that campaign. I'm not sure how many people knew about Rebecca Dallett or Jill Karofsky before they were elected to the state Supreme Court. So I have every confidence that there are going to be great candidates stepping forth, not on just the liberal side, but people who stand up for the law and want to make sure that every Wisconsinite has a fair shake in our Supreme Court. Ultimately, that's what it's about. That's what I want as an attorney and as a citizen.
Senator Kelda Roys, thanks so much for joining the show this morning.
Great to be with you.
Still ahead, the author of the PFAS bill that the governor vetoed, the changes he's open to get the proposal passed.